it occurred to me on a very profound level. I mean, I wasn't this stupid, but on a much more profound level, that happiness was a choice. And that I'd been lucky, I'd had good karma, I would call it, that I had a nice family, everything moved easily for me, I had good karma, things worked. But from that point, I was going to have to every day make a decision as to whether or not I would keep being upward moving with my energy, or if I would gradually age out of the system, which is what we see people do. People just quit at a certain point. Some people quit at the age of 10. It's just too hard. Either their own upbringing was too hard, or their whatever it is. But we're always having a choice. And when this woman told me that I had 3.5 decades or 2.5 decades to go instead of less than 1, I saw again, there I'm sitting. I'm just deciding, but what would that serve? How would that serve? To just lower our energy and do less and less until the lights go out for the last time. You know, depending on whatever the age is. Like, why were we born? What are we doing here? What is the purpose of it? You know, and the actual question behind that is quite simply, what causes happiness and what causes suffering? And it's such a simple question. When Paramhansa Yogananda, he wrote Autobiography of a Yogi, many of you know that book. When he came to America in 1920, which was just over 100 years ago, which is not very long in the great scheme of time and distance in history, he came with this enormous tradition of India, which is, you know, multiple religions, multiple expressions of each of those religions. I mean, a history that we in America can't even imagine. And he came to America, he lived in Los Angeles. And Los Angeles was just, you know, Hollywood and just all this brand new stuff, because he wanted us in this country and ultimately in the whole world to just start over from a spiritual perspective. And he had one really serious intent, which is he wanted us to not in a disrespectful way, but in a like let's prune the tree sort of way, which is what is the essence of spiritual life. And the essence of spiritual life is not what you belong to, it's not the dogmas you can list. I have, Dambara being one of them, but I have 3 friends who grew up, as it happened, all grew up in San Francisco, all grew up in Irish Catholic families. And if you poke them in the right way, they'll start reciting the Catholic catechism to you, you know, which it was just like, I never heard such a thing. And they just blah, 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 God is this happens like this. And it was like, oh my gosh. And hundreds of years of, you know, just building up that idea. And in India, thousands of years of building up this ritual and that ritual. Yogananda wiped the whole slate clean. And he started teaching people how to meditate. And you know, the nature of meditation is it's just you. You know, that's why we find it so difficult, because it's just me and me. And now he brought it to us with devotion to the greater reality of which we are a part. And he even talked a great deal about God as in the compassionate form of the mother. But even without any of that, just the possibility that there is another dimension that I can access if I choose to access it, and that is not only the definition of my spiritual self, in fact, it's the definition of myself. And he did it for one reason, and the reason was, it will show us what causes suffering and what brings happiness. And if one explores that inner world sufficiently, then everything else will reveal itself. And you don't need a priest, and you don't need a ritual. Now, I myself am clergy, you know, and somebody mentioned the blue. I always wear blue because this is my initiation color. So I have added some of the accoutrements of a dedicated spiritual life. And I do it because it helps me. You know, every day when I look at my closet and I sigh and I think, okay, one more blue day. It helps me remember. You know, and it puts a little bit of a, what would you say the word? In a positive sort of way, it constantly reminds me not to lose my way, not to lose my way. And that's the primary power of it. Whatever external reality has is something else, but really the reality of it is first and foremost for the one who's doing it. But what we're all doing, and this is what our age is like right now. I mean, traditions that nobody thought would ever shift. You know, family life, marriage, gender roles, just churches, spirituality, races, ethnicities. It's so scrambled. Everybody is going toward who I am inside instead of who I appear to be outside. And this is not an accident. There's whole wonderful long things I could talk about the evolution of the planet and where we're going, and there's all this. But all of us are in this now. And the question is, what's being asked of us? Why is this happening? Why was I born now? And what side of this whole story do I really want to be on? In other words, how can I help? How can I serve? How can I be an instrument of light? And we're also living in times, and I do feel this very passionately. I've felt this from the very beginning, meaning very beginning of my essentially adult life. I was 18 years old when I found out that there was just like a whole nother way to think about life, which was Indian teachings came to me, but it was more just like, you know, there's just a whole nother way to think about this. And then I met Swami, as Colin was saying, when I was 1969, when I was 22. So, and then I just threw my lot in. I've never done anything else. But what I've had the privilege of doing is representing where I think the whole world is going, which is we are part of a greater reality. We are all interdependent with each other, the plants, the trees, the creatures, and you know, but simultaneously, there's a whole group of people, I call them Divine Mother's rowdy children, who are trying really hard to keep everything as it used to be, and are fighting really hard against this other force that is really moving us together. And it's not an age where you can just kind of sit quietly and just do what your grandparents did and just have it be okay. It's like there's too many uncertainties. But such a time is a tremendous opportunity for personal growth. Just a tremendous opportunity to discover that we are so much bigger than we thought we were. And we can be so much kinder than we thought we could be. We can be so much more compassionate than we thought. And it's also a time when I feel that we're being called to behave that way. Because if you think about how things happen, we see the material manifestation here, but everything begins on the level of ideas and of thought. I mean, just you look at this building. Somebody had an idea to build this building. There was a time when this building wasn't here. And somebody somewhere thought, oh, I could build a building. And then they applied energy to it. They figured out how it was going to look and where they were going to get the money and who they were going to hire and how they were going to use it. So idea, energy, and then here we sit in these comfortable chairs. And everything that manifests in this world, including attitudes and politics and prejudices and expansive thinking, it all starts as ideas. And far more than most people realize, it's on that level of ideas and energy. That's where real change takes place. By the time it's manifesting in this world, and really, literally, it's over. So it's much more important where we're going and how we're using our energy. Swamiji said once, He said, if you judge yourself at all, which I don't recommend, he said, you don't look at what you've already accomplished. He said, look what you aspire to become. Because we are, just as I was talking about time, all those years of experience, where is it? The only thing that's actually happening is what is coming through us now. Who I am now. I could have been the nicest person or the worst person I could have, which I don't happen to have, but I could have a very dark history behind me. If I go back enough incarnations, I'm sure I'll find that dark history. And even in this one, I was naughty at some times. I was on the rowdy side of Divine Mother's children. I played with the bad kids sometimes, but mostly it's a pretty clean story. But in this moment, I could become evil just like that. If I chose to be, or if I was inclined to be, and then that's who I would be. So all we are is just what we are in this moment, and what we are radiating is determining the fate of the planet. And certainly, I don't mean like we are determining the fate of the planet, but we are certainly determining the aura in which we live, and we are building the habits and the self-definition that's going to decide who we're going to be tomorrow. This is why Swami said, what you are now is just the end of everything that you've already done. What you will be is according to what you're doing today. And the world that we're going to live in is going to be determined by what we're doing today. And there's a huge movement toward the light going on in the world now. Huge. I was very discouraged for a while, and then one day I just realized that's just silly. Because everywhere people are feeling that we're being called to something. However you express it, doesn't make any difference. So my offering in this moment is a lot of commitment and some unique experience with a very fine teacher about sort of how we move and what we do. And so I'm going to open this for questions and discussion because I think I've said enough. Absolutely evil exists. You just look all around and look at it, but you have to call it what it is. Evil is a misunderstanding of where happiness comes from. And some people misunderstand so deeply that they behave in such a way that far from bringing happiness to themselves or to anyone else, they create what I like to think of as shadow, because they block the light. When I first heard about reincarnation when I was 18, it was a bit of an odd idea for me, but I've thought about it for decades and I've become quite convinced. If you add in reincarnation, whatever happens in one life is just the chapter in a big book. And we are all on a journey to understand what causes suffering and what causes happiness so that we can live in perfect joy, which is how our Creator intended for us to live. So people make mistakes. And the darn thing is, you see, we don't live from being told. We don't change from being told. If anybody remembers their childhood, they remember that. What did your parents say to you and how much did you listen? You just have to go out and you have an experience. And when you have an experience, then you know. So we are all, and this is a hard thing to appreciate, we are all equally loved by God. We are all equally an expression of the Creator, and we are all equally loved by God. That's why I refer to these people as rowdy children of Divine Mother, because they are. And we have as many lifetimes as we care to take to figure it out. And we have many, many lifetimes, so we get to try. Wow, if I have power over people, if I get to exercise, be unkind and cruel to them, how does that make me feel? Well, in the moment, you might feel really big. But what happens next life and next life and next life and next life when that karma begins to catch up with you? And we all get to learn. We all get to learn. And it's a challenging concept, but you just look around you. There's no other word for what some people do. You just have to call it evil. You can be naive about it, but you have to also realize, and Swami put it this way, He wrote this after, I think it was actually when the Iraqi war started, and there was a lot of controversy, and people became very popular to denigrate America by Americans. And Swami said very simply, just because evil exists everywhere does not mean that evil is present in the same proportion everywhere, which is an extremely important thing to understand. So even if a country or a person or a group of people make bad mistakes, you can't throw them away merely because part of it is misguided. And then in some context, the hurtful actions are enormous. It's just the way this world is. And that's part of the innocence of wisdom versus the innocence of childhood, which is we can be happy when we're living in a dream world. It's when we actually can confront this world as it is and still find the capacity to be compassionate and loving and appropriate. And appropriate is the key word. When you're in the face of darkness, and that darkness has more power to be dark than you have to love them into being good, you have to be appropriate in how you respond to it. And oftentimes, because people don't want to admit that there is a shadow force in this world, they don't behave appropriately. And that's what we get to learn. The goal of life is to attune ourselves to the unconditional love of the divine and to receive in our hearts the joy of attunement with God. And it's not our job to deal with evil because it's too big an assignment for us. If you look at the whole world, that's what you're seeing right now. You're seeing those who are desperately holding on to form at any price. You know, the Russian Empire has to be expanded and has to own all of these countries. And these countries are saying, what are you talking about? You know, we are our own people. We're going to be this. This church is trying to prove that they're the only one and trying to crush the others. And people say, what are you talking about? And that's what we're caught in right now. That's why we have to actually, though, not be superficial in our experience, because this is a real struggle that's going on. So we have to be standing deep where we're standing. In Autobiography of a Yogi, Yogananda has this one line that says, thoughts are not individually created, they're universal. And we do not actually create our own thoughts, we merely attune ourselves to vibrations of consciousness that already exist in the universe. So that's even a step beyond that I send my thoughts out and they unify with other thoughts. And that also, skips over the question of what's traveling where. And what we're dealing with is that there are many simultaneously existing levels of consciousness, from the most evil, depraved level of consciousness to the saints and the masters whose consciousness is infinite. Jesus, Krishna, Yogananda, I would put in that company also. But those masters who are God realized, who have realized the infinite. And our own destiny is that ultimately we will all ascend, or however you want to call it, we will all realize our actual true nature. And realize is the right word. Yogananda called his work self-realization with the capital S, as opposed to the little s. And realization is interesting because you don't acquire it, you don't earn it, you don't, get points, you don't win it in a lottery. It's always there and you become aware of it. So it's a question not of acquisition, but of suddenly knowing something that wasn't created when you knew it, but you suddenly knew it. So all of us, all the time, by whatever we're doing, we are always vibrating on a certain level, and as a consequence, we are reflecting that level of awareness. If you know anybody who has an inclination to be depressed, they can be in the happiest party, and everything that happens will make them sad. It has nothing to do with anything that's going on. They have just locked their thought band into what I call the geologic strata of that. When I was going through a personal difficulty in my life and I was sad, I was grief-stricken a lot of the time, I felt myself, I would just go into the geological strata of grief. And I would almost like I would forget what the grief was about. It was just my life experience had opened it. My radio receiving station, which was my own self, locked on that channel, and it just was flooded by it. But if I shifted my channel by meditating, by singing, by standing outside, by the grace of God, exactly the same circumstances, but I'd changed my radio frequency, so to speak. And that's actually what we're doing. We are part of a greater reality. We appear to be individual, but that individual appearance is created by the physical body. And on more subtle levels than the physical body, we are part of this greater reality of vibration. So it's a question of what we tune into. And then this world is still here, but it just looks different to us. Think about it this way: when you're angry with someone, and you give that anger to someone else, by the time it reaches them, some of the force that came through you reaches them, but the full power of the force actually affects you. Anger, fury, vengeance, anything that you have, you're the one who's most affected, and it becomes a habit. This is a whole metaphysics of the chakras and all this sort of thing. What we do creates an enduring energy pattern, which creates magnetism, which causes us to call more of that same energy into us. But you know, the worst criminal, if he has a revelation, and you know, often saved by Jesus Christ, and I'm so glad that he does continue to save people, he becomes a good person the next day. It's like, what happened? He just changed the frequency and shifted over to the next one. And so we're much more engaged with each other and engaged with this universe than we may realize. And it gets extremely interesting. When I first started this in my early 20s, I didn't know I'd be so fascinated 50 years later that, you know, like every day I'm learning something new about, because once you start increasing your awareness, think about it this way. If you didn't know something and you learned it, and I've been behaving this way. My family, we were very intellectual, and my brother was a champion debater. My brother was state champion debater of the state of Texas twice. You know, I was 50. 50 was a big year for me. When I found out that conversation was not debate. I always thought that debate was conversation. And I lost a lot of friends, you know. But I became aware of something that had always been there. And all of us, we just become aware of something. And then you become aware of something else. What is the limit? What is the limit of what you may not know now that you could know? All the saints and masters say, infinite. Be ye therefore perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect. That which I do, ye shall do, in greater things. You know, this is what Jesus himself said, what to speak of what the Bhagavad Gita tells us. Is there any limit? No. Is there any limit, therefore, to our joy, to our freedom, to our power? No. And everything else just becomes waves on the ocean. It's a very happy prospect. It's a little confusing to think about ego, even though it's a very good word and we have to use it. Because we all have egos. Jesus Christ had an ego. Yogananda had an ego, in the sense that there was a unique expression that was related to the body he was in that he had to express. And all of us are operating. We have to operate this body. It's part of what we have to do. And ego is simply the infinite identified with the limitation. And it all emanates from having just one body and all the things that come with it. One race, one ethnicity, one gender. Well, not nowadays. You can have multiple genders, but you used to be able to just have one. And all of one age, all of these things, life experience. That's what ego is. It's that I become identified by this and defined by this. But even when you become infinite in your understanding, if you're still living in a physical body, you still have to keep it going. So a piece of you has to stay identified. So it's not helpful to consider the enemy, the ego, an enemy. It's just a limited way of defining yourself. So what you want to do is you want to put the ego in context. Swami Kriyananda had a marvelous way of saying it. He said, I never identify with being Swami Kriyananda. He said, but Kriyananda is an event for which I am responsible. And it was such, and has always been such a free way to think about it. And therefore, I have to pay attention. I can't just jettison it. But I don't want to say that just because I'm responsible for this event, that's who I am. If you put on a big event, you have to be conscious of it. But if you actually think that it's you, then you've lost your marbles a little bit, which is how we look to the enlightened masters. We look like we've lost our marbles. Karma is a very interesting word. And the more these Sanskrit words come into common English usage, the more wildly misunderstood they are. So karma is one of those words that's just wildly and gloriously, almost amazingly misunderstood. What karma is the force that keeps causing us to have to have more experiences so that we can understand what causes suffering and what brings happiness. Because if you think about all your life experiences, you go toward things you think will make you happy, and they either do or don't. And we have attitudes and feelings and actions, and they either make us happy or they don't. And since our destiny is to be infinite in our awareness and perfectly blissful, and that is how we're made. Someone said to me, I'm sorry, I can't remember who, life is the only game in which the game is to figure out what the rules are. And the rules we're trying to figure out is what causes suffering and what causes happiness. And if we look at all our experiences honestly, we realize that's what the progress is. We're disillusioned, or we're disappointed, or we're fulfilled. We're fulfilled and we realize why. What caused it? What made it work? And how fully satisfying was that fulfillment? Because we learn from being fulfilled as well as from being thwarted. You know, now I have money, now I have a house, now I have children who, you know, are making a living on their own. Am I satisfied? Or is there something more that my heart is longing for? There's much more suicide among rich people than poor people, because they have everything they're supposed to have and they're still not happy. Okay? So another way of describing karma is something you don't yet understand. You don't yet know about what causes happiness and what causes suffering. So it's a simple way is to say karma is an unlearned lesson. Another thing you might call karma is ignorance. Ignorance of what causes happiness and what causes suffering. And because we have free will, and because God loves us, and however you think about God like that, but because there is a divine power guiding us that loves us, it's going to keep helping us to learn things. And so when I asked Swami once something about karma and something like that, he says, well, if you're still afraid of something, there's something about suffering and happiness in regard to that you haven't figured out yet. You know, I have a natural fear, like many people do, of being incarcerated. I have a fear of physical pain. Most people have a fear of physical pain, but not everyone. I still believe that if my body is in pain, then my mind has to suffer. And that doesn't mean that physical pain is anything I seek, but I'm consciously afraid of it. I'm afraid of being betrayed by my friends. You know, I'm afraid of a whole lot of other things that might be good. You could be afraid of having too much money. What would I do with all that money? You could be afraid of being in an intimate relationship. You could be afraid of being a parent. You could be afraid of going to college. Because there's something in that situation that you need to face in order to learn what causes happiness and what causes suffering. And when you finally understand that, then you're not afraid of anything. Because what could happen to you that's going to take away your happiness or your suffering? This is why you have the extraordinary life of Jesus Christ, who came and willingly accepted crucifixion. You know, he could have run away from those Roman guards. He could have not created so much controversy that made the corrupt priesthood of the time, the fact that it happened to be the Jewish faith, that wasn't the point. The point was they were a corrupt priesthood. He was disrupting their gig. He could have just left them alone, but he had an example to set, and he was completely fearless in the face of that. Even now, my Father could send legions of angels to rescue me. But it is in the fulfillment of righteousness that we will do this. I mean, how can you be that unafraid? Because you have understood what causes happiness and what causes suffering, which includes Jesus Christ was an event for which he was responsible. And even the body did not define him. It was in context. Jesus was born without karma because there was nothing, he had no ignorance. So there we are.